I'm recording my homily for the 6th Sunday of Ordinary Time. This is the Sunday right before Ash Wednesday. In fact, I'm running a little late, so today actually is Ash Wednesday, which is fine. My homily for the last 3 weeks are tying into Lent, and the 6th Sunday of Ordinary Time is no different. I'm going to tie it back into Lent. So we'll use the readings. You know, the Gospel reading for this Sunday is really beautiful. I don't know if you noticed, because there's a theme, there's a message in it that's just very subtle. And it's when this leper comes to Jesus and asks to be healed, right? So we can see all kinds of symbolism in that of us going to Jesus, asking to be healed. But this leper goes to Jesus to be healed, and Jesus heals him. But the thing is that the leper is disobedient. The leper is instructed not to tell anybody. Now that's kind of mean. You know, here, can you imagine being a leper? So the leper is ostracized by the community, is cast out, and so not only are they given this death sentence by this disease, but they're cast out. They can't be around anybody. And so they're going to die alone. They're going to die away from their family and friends. And so he's healed of all of that. He can come and he can interact with people. He can see his family again. And then Jesus says, don't tell anybody. Anyways, he doesn't obey. So he goes around telling everybody. Well, as he's healed and as he reintegrates back into the community, Jesus then is forced out into the desert. Did you catch that in the gospel? Because he's telling everybody, there's so many people pressing in on him that he finds himself being forced out into the desert. And so he, in a sense, he's taking the place of the leper, while the leper's coming back into the community. And so just another side to that whole relationship, the whole dynamic of God with us, that God is willing to be cast out in order to help us be brought back into reconciliation. And so, again, Jesus on the cross, it's a beautiful example of that. He allows himself to be cast out in order to help us come back. Now, this Sunday, I want to focus on one word, in a sense, and how that gospel manifests that, about how our faith should embody it. And the word is simplicity. Simplicity of life, simplicity of faith. Now, as I was praying about this, I felt just what came over me was just 3 steps of our faith. And if we keep those 3 steps in proper order, everything works out great. Now, not easy. It's simple. Not easy, though. Okay? We keep them in the proper order. If we get them out of order, then things get complicated and they get really messy and ugly. Okay? This is just how our lives go. First, God is first. Pretty simple, right? God is first. My neighbor is second, and I am third. Right? Very simple. God is first, my neighbor is second, I am third. Now, we keep things in that order, and it's amazing that no matter how difficult life gets, life is still great. Life is beautiful. We see everything that God is desiring to do. The Holy Spirit's working. We see our love of our neighbor constantly there. So when we're spiritually depressed, like I talked about last week, when we are the victim, think about the leper, when we become consumed with our own problems and woe is me, it's because we put ourselves first, right? We're not thinking about our neighbor, and we're probably mad or angry or resentful towards God, or we're starting to have doubts God's even at work, but we put ourselves first. Now, when people are just too busy, a lot of times they're putting their neighbor up there, or others possibly, sometimes themselves, but other times they're just putting their neighbor first. They're saying, I'm really active, I'm in this group. But God is behind that. And so it still gets messy and ugly. Okay, simplicity. God is first, my neighbor is second, I am third. I was hearing confessions of first reconciliation kids, and as priests we joke, it's with the little kids, it's like getting pelted with marshmallows when we're hearing their confessions. But it was great. The kids did great examination of conscience, and as I'm talking to them before I start hearing their confession, I asked them the question if certain things were a sin. And I said, okay, is it a sin to miss Mass on Sunday? On any Sunday, it is a sin to miss Mass on Sunday. And about half the kids were like, yes, it's a sin. And the other kids are just looking like, I don't know, is it? And I know a lot of our kids are not coming to church every Sunday, or some of them even regularly. But the parents were sitting there, and I wanted the parents to hear this conversation. And I went into detail about, the kids can't drive, obviously, so the culpability. I talked about culpability and what would put culpability on these kids in terms of their, do they want to go to Mass? Do they not want to go to Mass? Are they helping their parents? Not, okay, so et cetera, et cetera. But just the idea, God is first. God is first. And if that gets swept aside, then it's just bad. It's not good, right? Our lives are going to go in the wrong direction. Okay, so how simple it is, and yet how hard it is, especially in our culture. God is first. Now, I'm going to go into a couple. So, my brothers are engineers. I used to be an engineer. And one of my brothers, he had this expression. So he was a civil engineer where they build structures and stuff. And he said, anybody can build a bridge that stands. Anybody can build a bridge that stands. But it takes an engineer, it takes a professional, it takes one who's an expert to build a bridge that barely stands. In other words, one that's designed properly. And so you don't need to, spend $5 billion building a bridge when an engineer can design it correctly and build it for, a quarter of that, whatever the case may be. But it takes an engineer to build a bridge that barely stands, but that is also safe, right? Obviously. There's another principle that in the engineering field we would often hear. Because the reality is, the more complicated a design is of something, it doesn't necessarily mean the smarter the people are behind it. In fact, it means the opposite. The simpler the design, the more ingenious the inventor is, the designer is. And the more complicated it is, well, the less ingenious, the less expertise they have on it, or the less professional they are. So you think of somebody who's cooking, right? You see somebody who's in the kitchen cooking. Somebody who's really proficient at cooking, they're not using measuring cups. They're not using their watch to time things. They're doing everything by sight, by feel. And it usually turns out a lot better than somebody who's using measuring cups and their watch and all that stuff. Because the person who's measuring, they don't have a feel for it. They don't know inside of themselves. They're not professional. They're dependent on instructions from another professional, right? And you can think of any field in the world, and that is true. Parents who are just really good at guiding their children, and so they know the balance between discipline and love and consolation and challenge, and they know how to lead their children because they know their children, right? Whereas somebody who doesn't know kids, they don't know how to work with them, each individual child. Okay, and so we want to be proficient and professional Christians. We want to have the ability. And the more proficient professional we are, the better we're at the gospel, at teaching and living it, the simpler it is. The more our life reflects the simplicity of that peace that comes when we say, okay, God is first. When I wake up Sunday morning, I know God is first. That battle is gone. The battle to whether I should go to Mass or not, whether I should do something else or not, whether I should take the kids to their soccer practice or not. No. Sunday morning is God's. That battle's gone. It's done. God is first. My neighbor is second. I am third. Then you think about the Mass on Sunday morning, and it reflects that perfect reality. We all come and we're surrounded by, or we surround the altar, we surround the ambo, we surround the Eucharist, we all come together as a family, but it's all around Jesus Christ, and so God is first. But we come together, we don't come individually. We don't come into church and just walk by the tabernacle and receive the Eucharist like going through a McDonald's drive-thru. We come to Mass and we celebrate together. So God is first, my neighbor is second. I'm there for my neighbor, right? And so when you think about the Mass, it's only third when I start thinking about myself. But first I'm there for God, I'm there for my neighbor, and then I'm there for myself. But it's beautiful. You need all three for the Mass to be beautiful. Okay? Simple, but not necessarily easy. I was thinking about Jesus. So for Lent, how the idea of going out into the desert for 40 days. And I wonder if I were to ask you, or somebody asked me and said, I want you to go out in the desert for 40 days. So for this Lent, you're going to just separate yourself completely from everybody, kind of like the leper. You're going to go into the desert for 40 days. Now, I know the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go right across the freeway here to Cabela's, and I'm going to buy all kinds of gear, right? Because, you know why? Because I'm not a professional survivalist. I'm not good in the wilderness. I'm an amateur. And so I'm going to think I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And before you know it, I'm going out in the desert with a giant RV full of stuff, right? But a professional, they only need a few things. In fact, they don't even really need a backpack. I mean, if they really know what they're doing, they only need a few things. It's amazing how somebody who's really good at that can get away with so little. Again, simplicity is better, because it implies a expertise. And so for us to be experts, growing experts in the gospel, and manifesting the simplicity in our own lives. The first reading is from Leviticus, and so it's the official instructions of what to do with someone who's a leper or someone who's being diagnosed as a leper. And so you can imagine you being an Israelite, or one of us being an Israelite, and then one day, and knowing about leprosy, but one day, you roll up your sleeve and you're like, ooh, that doesn't look good. You have a blotch, you have something going on. And maybe for a while you can hide it. You could say, well, shoot, I hope it goes away. I'm not going to tell anybody, right? We kind of do that sometimes. But eventually, it becomes known if it truly is leprosy. We can't hide it any longer. And so in Leviticus, the example is the wound was on his head. He couldn't hide it. And so the instruction is you go to the priest, and the priest, I guess, would have some ability to evaluate leprosy, and they would determine whether it was leprosy. And if it is, then that person is cast out. And they give very specific instructions to the leper of what they need to do because of that. Now, the first time I preached on this reading from Leviticus, I will never forget it. I was actually down on a retreat down in California. And it was a retreat for seminarians who were Catholics. We had seminarians who were Protestants. And we had seminarians who were Jewish. They were studying to become Jewish rabbis. And it was a very interesting interfaith retreat, because, you're trying to be friendly and loving and learn from each other and not feel competitive, right? But it came time for us to celebrate the Mass, the Catholic Mass. And so the others would just be there kind of observing and watching and, just praying with us, obviously not receiving the Eucharist, but just watching. And so I was a deacon, was not a priest yet, but I was still a seminarian, and they asked me to give the homily. And I'm thinking to myself, what do I say? I mean, the reading's from Leviticus. It's about the leper. It's about him being cast out. It's like, what do I say about that? And so I went and sat before the tabernacle. I just went before Jesus, and I'm like, Jesus, you're going to have to help me out here, because I have nothing. I have no idea what to say to these other seminarians about. I have no insight. Well, the longer I sat there, all of a sudden, that little Holy Spirit light bulb, bing, goes on. It's like, oh, it's like right in front of me. It's so simple. It's that moment where it's like, oh my goodness, that's just so beautiful. It's so simple too. But I didn't see it before. And so this is what the simple thing that came to me was. To somebody who does not put God first, but puts himself first, and they're diagnosed with leprosy, they're going to be the victim. It's like, oh my goodness, my life is over. I've got this death sentence from this disease, and now I can't see my family, and I'm all alone. You can imagine a person despairing and maybe even, contemplating suicide or, but to the person who keeps God first and his neighbor second, guess what? He now takes on not the role of the victim of the community. He takes the role of the hero, because his job now is to protect everybody else. That's why they say that he needs to wear a certain garment, and he needs to announce himself as unclean and say, I am now here to protect you. So if somebody tries to get next to me, my job is to protect you so that you don't get what I have. And so this person has one of the most important jobs in the whole community. And to somebody who continues to put God first, he can see God working in that selfless love for the community, for the other. And then the neighbor comes there, and then the self. But they can see in themselves this. They can see this, not this victim of being up on the cross, but this one who comes to protect, to redeem, to save us, to protect us from the evil that he took upon himself from us. He took the leprosy, the spiritual leprosy. He took it away from us. He's the hero, if you will. Maybe that's not the best word. But he's not the victim. And so when we are proficient, when we are living the faith simply, we're never the victim. It's never woe is me. It's man, this is the context where I am now being called to do that, to give myself for the sake of the other, according to God's plan. It's beautiful. It turns the whole thing right up on its head, right? And we know in our lives there's times, we complain. I complain. There's times we complain about our situation. We don't like it's like, oh, only, we look over the fence and it's like, oh, only if I had that, or only if I was there. That's the victim. That's the self. Jesus is not there. Jesus is not on the other side of the fence. He's right here. In Lent, we try to have that simplicity. And so all the things that we do during Lent should be simple, right? But also powerful. So I'm just going to repeat some of the things I've been sharing about Lent. Number one, everything that we do during Lent should be done for the sake of the other. Offered for someone specific. So today's Ash Wednesday, so I had my first day of taking a bucket shower, right? This is one of my little things. And I learned a few lessons in the midst of doing it. But before I started, I said, okay, I need to do this for someone. And so I thought of someone in my life who I should be offering this little sacrifice for, okay? To make it holy. Okay, so make sure you offer for someone else. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for someone else, okay? All right, so that's the first thing. So that involves love of neighbor and doing it for God, obviously. Okay? The other thing is that they should incorporate, they should be part of your day. So you have things going on throughout your day that are just constantly reminding you that it's Lent. They don't need to be horribly difficult. They shouldn't be horribly difficult. But there should be things throughout your day. So a little thing I'm going to be doing throughout Lent is I'm not going to be listening to any music when I'm in my vehicle, okay? I want to be praying the rosary while I'm in my vehicle. Now, obviously, when you're with someone else, you can't always control that, some of those things. And so then you're flexible. You say, okay, Lord, I'm just going to offer this for you that I can't do my Lenten promise in this moment. Then even that becomes a sacrifice. But, so there's this thing, when we're driving, that's something I can do. So you can be thinking, what are the things that you're doing? Do not let this Lent slip by, okay? All right. Now, the beautiful image of the leper, the one who has the disease, coming to Jesus to be healed. Again, sacrament of reconciliation is all over that, right? Taking our spiritual leprosy, our sins, the way we made life complicated, the way we put ourselves first, giving it to Jesus, and then watching him in his love for us take it upon himself. Sometimes in confession I say something. I say, now Jesus has taken it and he has destroyed your sin. It's gone forever. But I think it's actually more profound than that. It's not necessarily like, yes, it's destroyed forever, but first he takes it upon himself. First he carries that sacrifice. He suffers with our sin. He takes it upon himself. And so that's the eternal presence again of the Eucharist, of him pouring himself out in his body and blood for us. Okay. I hope your Lent is going to go fantastic. I hope you have a great plan and you have flexibility to be listening to God's voice throughout it. All right. God bless.